have not got a Julia Donaldson book for any other reason than keeping my notes nice and flat. I thought I'd start by telling you a few random things about my life, because I like to know about people not before I hear about them, but I like getting pictures of people. So I am the daughter of two classical musicians. So my playground when I was growing up was concert halls. While there were rehearsals going on, me and my sister were generally off exploring and racing down hallways and finding kind of secret rooms and having fun there. I am and always have been a home bird, and aged about 12, I asked my mum if when I was married, me and my husband could move into the upstairs room, and she said, of course. We never did, but and I married Al 2 weeks before my 21st birthday. We'd been corresponding by letter just after we'd first met, and by the time we started going out, I was pretty sure that he was the person I wanted to marry. But we did somewhat eclipse what would have been a big birthday bash of my mum's 50th, my 21st, and my sister's 18th, and instead we had a wedding, which took a while to forgive. And we have 3 fabulous and completely exhausting children. I've got Elise, who's 10, Poppy, who's 8, and Florence, who's 5. And I don't think I've ever been more tired or exasperated or delighted and loving towards anything in the last 11 years, but it's been wonderful and challenging. And my mum came to know Jesus the year before I was born. She was brought up attending a local Roman Catholic church, but didn't actually have any faith to call her own. It wasn't something that she ever explored. And then she had her first child, my older sister Samantha, and lost her at birth sadly because of a negligent midwife. And this led, understandably, my parents through quite a dark valley. But my mum came out the other side, having found peace from a relationship with God, discovering a relationship with God. And then fast forward 7 years after that, my dad became a Christian at my mum's baptism, which was much to the astonishment of everyone, because he was a very, very vocally anti-Christian up to that point. So the minister wasn't there the week he became a Christian and said, I don't believe it, when he heard that my dad had become a Christian. And then my sister and I grew up in the context of going to church, because as soon as my mum became a Christian, she'd take us along. And whilst we've had our wobbles, we've not strayed from that throughout our lives. In another life long ago, I was a secondary school history teacher. And more recently, I spent the last 5 years working pastorally with students, which I just think is the most amazing job ever, because you basically get paid to go from coffee shop to coffee shop, with spending time with people who are convinced they're going to change the world, and basically supporting them and challenging them, and getting to be someone who stands with them. It's just awesome. But thinking more, just turning more to the theme of this morning, which was gratitude. I had quite a few kind of quizzical looks when I said I'd like to talk about gratitude. And I want to start by just reading a few wise words taken from the Bible. I'll refer to the Bible a few times today, because as a Christian, I believe it's got an awful lot of wisdom to offer and guidance for how to live my life. So these are taken from a letter that Paul wrote to the church in Philippi. And I think this is from the New Living Translation. And he says, always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Let everyone see that you are considerate in all you do. Remember, the Lord's coming soon. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he's done. And then you'll experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guide your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. And now, dear brothers, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what's true and honourable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Then the God of peace will be with you. And in this particular book, in this letter to the Philippians, Paul mentions joy, rejoice, praise, or other derivatives at least 15 times. And I think this kind of sets a tone of something about how he wants us to live. And whilst the words aren't exactly the same, I really think that there's a massively strong link between gratitude and joy. There's a choice of how to live, and that's something that Paul encourages us in. So I wanted to just ask the question then, why be grateful? And then I've got a few answers that I'm going to suggest for that, but I'm sure there are more. But the first one I wanted to say is that God is always good. I believe that God is always good. The good thing is that our gratitude doesn't need to depend on circumstances, which is really good, because we all have time when the circumstances, it doesn't make sense to be grateful. And I think in every situation there are things that we can be thankful for. Although I do want to make it clear, what I'm not saying is that we should be thankful for every situation, because that's not the case. In a slightly different translation of the same passage, Paul says, don't be pulled in different directions or worried about a thing. Be saturated in prayer throughout each day, offering your faith-filled requests before God with overflowing gratitude. Tell him every detail of your life, and then God's wonderful peace that transcends human understanding will guard your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. And I think it can be quite easy to read that passage as, don't worry, pray about everything. And there's a lot of truth in there, and I would advocate kind of praying about things, because I think it makes a big difference. But actually, I think it's really key that Paul doesn't just say, don't worry, pray about everything. He says, don't worry, pray about everything with gratitude. Like, he starts with that. And I think if we start from a perspective of being grateful, it changes our perspective on everything else. I think sometimes we can be tempted to put God on trial and demand that he accounts for things, and ask, well, why about this, and what about that prayer that wasn't answered, and how about this thing, and whilst it's right to be able to bring our questions to God, actually I think that when we change our perspective and come from a position of gratitude for who he is and what he's done for us, then actually we put him in his rightful place as God, and we go from there. I think that thanksgiving and praise are really bound together. So we don't thank God for the circumstances we're walking through, but the good thing is that we can thank him for so much during them, that he's always present with us. He's always good. He's always faithful. He's always kind. He's always trustworthy. Another book in the Bible, the Psalms, is full of this kind of thing. And the Psalms is such an interesting book. It's basically a collection of poems and songs. And so many of them, you read them and the people are like, and this is awful, and I wish you'd just smite my enemies, and this is terrible, and this is terrible. And in God, you're good. And you kind of read these and thinking, oh my goodness, these Psalms, he was so inconsistent. He was saying on the one hand, there was all this terrible stuff, and then but actually I think the beautiful thing in that, the significance, is that the psalmist was being so real about all the rubbish that was going on and all the terrible things that he was having to walk through, and yet he was declaring that through all those things, like, God remains the same. He's the same yesterday and today and forever, and actually we can hold on to that, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And so actually that's something that we can do, that we can just hold on to the goodness of God through what we're walking through. Some of you know, but we've been walking a really tough walk with some of our best friends recently, and he's been waiting for a liver transplant. Actually, currently the news is possibly changing because he started to improve again, but actually it's been really, really interesting. He's turned 40 this year and has got a liver condition that's genetic, and he's got a wife and 3 young children, and he's been told recently that he needs this transplant. And I was sitting down with another friend and his wife in the summer when she just heard that her husband was going to have this transplant, and she was processing the real things that they were walking through. She was processing, am I going to be a single mum in the next year? Is our son going to remember his dad in a few years? She was walking through all of that, and she said, but do you know what? Actually, me and God, we're okay. Like, I'm just devastated this is going on, but actually we're okay. I trust God, and whatever happens, like, we're okay, and he's good. And I just was blown away by walking through something like that with a friend. There was no sort of, it's fine, it'll all be okay. Like, it was all on the table. She was being so, like, raw about where they were, and yet she was like, do you know what, me and God are okay. I'm not offended with him. I'm not like, I'm disappointed this is happening, but I was blown away, and there was something in that that I thought they're journeying this well. They are choosing to anchor themselves in sort of unchangeable truths, and they're holding up under the high stress situation. And actually, we're praying for a miracle there, and he's starting to improve, so that's amazing. But actually, the truth of it is that they are holding fast, regardless of what's going on. So we can be thankful because God's always good. And also another outworking of that is that he always cares. And the wonderful thing about that is that he doesn't just care about the big things, and he doesn't just care about kind of world peace and people who are awaiting organ transplants, but he cares about the small details of our lives. In another book in the Bible, in Matthew, Jesus says, "Aren't 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs on your head are all numbered, so don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows." There really isn't anything too small or insignificant to bring to God. And I was preparing this and was reminded of a good friend of mine, Ruth, was walking through breast cancer about 3 or 4 years ago. And they'd been given a list of these are the kind of things you can expect when you're going through chemo. And one of them, they said, you probably need to buy a soft toothbrush because you can get very sore gums. And she'd gone through her first round of chemo and her gums had been fine, so she hadn't bought that. She was like, that's one thing I don't need to put on the shopping list. And she went through her second round of chemo, and one day she woke up and her mouth was full of ulcers, and she was sitting there on the sofa just feeling a bit sorry for herself because she just, she was feeling terrible, and she then had this mouth. And there was a knock on the door, and someone was at the door. He was the daughter of a friend of theirs going, "Oh, my mum just asked if on my way back from work I could just drop in it. It's a soft toothbrush." And this friend of theirs had been clearing out and had remembered something that Ruth had said a while before and was like, "Oh, I'll just give that for her." And just, the God who makes the whole world, actually, he cared that at that moment Ruth would be sitting on her sofa, downcast, having endured some chemo, and actually had a soft toothbrush for her. And I just love that story because I think it just shows that God really cares. And I think sometimes as Christians we can get a bit flippant about, we can talk about, God's our friend and stuff, and actually remembering that God made the whole world, and he's the creator of the cosmos, and he's the person who sustains life, and yet he knows us incredibly well, and he knows everything that's going on in our hearts. I just have to sometimes remind myself how ridiculous this is, really, that actually God is so big and powerful, and yet he cares about the minutiae of our lives, and I'm so thankful that he does. So another reason why to be grateful is that actually choosing gratitude helps to mature us. In the Bible, again, there's a story of Mary, a friend of Jesus, not the mother of Jesus in this situation. And she was so grateful to Jesus for changing her life. There's a whole story there, but he'd come to her and her life was very different. And she was so thankful for this that at one point she breaks open a bottle of very expensive perfume and she pours it on Jesus' feet, and she wipes Jesus' feet with her tears and with her hair, and sort of it mingles with her tears, and it's this sort of extravagant and a very emotional gesture that really quite embarrasses the other people in the room. They're a bit, you can just imagine the kind of, oh gosh, what is she doing? Stop. And yet Jesus commends her for this, and he says, it's because she's been forgiven much that she loves much, and sort of leaves that kind of there. But there's a real choice there that to be thankful and to be extravagant in offering it. And actually we get the opportunity through choosing gratitude, often through those harder times of life, to offer up a gift to God. And sometimes that looks like actively being thankful and praising him. And I think sometimes it looks like clinging on with our fingernails and just kind of continuing to declare that God is good, because actually that's all you've got in you at that time. Quite a lot of you will know snippets of our story about our youngest daughter, Florence, but and others of you know more. But Florence she's 5 and she has a significant physical disability. It's actually an obscure genetic condition we learned this year after 3 years of genetic testing. But she was born in May 2014. after a really simple but quite sickly pregnancy and a very, very straightforward delivery. And she was perfect. And I just remember sitting there. I can remember with each of them, actually, they're just reveling the glory of like a newborn baby and just everything's perfect, just in love with this little bundle. And in many ways, it was even more so. I felt it even more acutely with Flo because I'd done it before and I wasn't quite so like shocked and kind of hit by a bus than I felt certainly after my first delivery. And even with 2, by number 3 I just felt like I knew what I was doing. That's but we were relaxed and happy, and I could just remember it all being perfect. And I look back on the early days as a real gift, actually, because we didn't know anything was going on. It was just lovely. We just enjoyed her without worrying. But actually, as time ticked on, we started to become, I just started to get niggles of like, something's not as it should be. And just near Christmas, so she was kind of approaching about 7 months old, I can remember Googling, when should my child sit up? Because I was like, I'm pretty sure she should be sitting by now. And there's a kind of a list of milestones that I saw on the computer, and I just had my heart sank because I thought, she's missed all of them. Like everyone, they were kind of things like sitting up, holding objects, passing objects from hand to hand, babbling, rolling over, like just none of it she could do. And I thought, oh. So, the following January, so the January after Christmas, we started kind of a journey of diagnosis. And that was, to this date, the toughest season that we've walked through. I'm so deeply grateful for the NHS, but the doctors didn't know what was going on. They were just desperately kind of looking to try and see what was going on. So with every new piece of sort of news or thing, we just went up and down because you're sort of, you don't know what to expect. And some days we were actively able to just praise God and be like, this is, we're getting through this, God's good and stuff. And other days, actually, we just rode on other people's faith and other people's prayers because actually we didn't have the strength. And I can remember actually one evening we were running student work at the time, and I had settled Florence and got her to bed and the other 2, and the students were all coming to my house, and we just had a consultant appointment that day, and I just thought, I just don't even have anything in me to give to these students. So I just, and I said to Al, I just can't be here. So I just went and sat on our sort of mentor's sofa, who lived 5 minutes up the road, and just sort of wept for the evening, and then came back and sort of, it was all out, and then came back and actually had fun with the students for the last hour or so. But I look back on this season and I'm really deeply grateful that God let us walk through this, because it's changed us and it's strengthened our faith in God, and it's strengthened our marriage. And I'm aware that is not something to take for granted either, because an awful lot of people who have significant health challenges with their children, that takes a toll on the relationship between the parents. And I'm also grateful that I've got a child like Florence. Like I think sometimes you can say to other people, I've got a child who's got a significant physical disability, and they go, I'm so sorry. And actually I'm like, no, please don't be sorry, because actually if you've met her, she's amazing. I think I've learned so much about God through this whole process as well. I think one of the things that's really highlighted to us is that the world looks at things in one way. In I think society, we prize independence and we prize sort of excellence, and we just have, the world has this picture of what greatness looks like. And then having a daughter like Florence has taught us so much that God prizes vulnerability, and he prizes like weakness and dependence. And, there's just so much. Florence falls so far short of what the world says is excellent, and yet we just look at her and she's amazing. And so actually it's taught us about God's heart for us, but also it's sort of flipped upside down what we think about how what's valuable. We're valuable, I think, in the end, because God made us, and actually Florence is no less valuable than anyone else. So that's been really interesting for us, and actually something of being able to find things to be grateful for during it has really helped us on this journey. So choosing gratitude helps us to grow in maturity. Another reason that I think it's good to be grateful is because it's an offering that's worth giving. The story that we had about Mary and the perfume, I don't think there was anything it wasn't like there was a desperate significance in that particular perfume or that particular act. I think the reason that God was so pleased, Jesus was so pleased about it, is because she just gave something that was expensive to her, and she showed with what she had and what she was that she loved Jesus. And there's a bit in the Old Testament where King David, God says to the king, please will you build me an altar of thanksgiving. So he has to kind of make sacrifices on this altar as a way of kind of showing praise and thanks to God. And so he finds some land that he wants to use for it, and he goes to the person who owns the land and says, I'd like to buy this land. And the landowner was like, you're the king, you can have it. And he says, no, I don't want you to give it to me, because I want to give to God something that's costly to me. I won't sacrifice something that doesn't cost me anything. And there's something amazing in that attitude, I think. I think that can take different forms for us. It can be actually kind of financially giving towards things, but I think sometimes it is kind of actually at those times where it's more costly, choosing to give a sacrifice of thanksgiving. As Jane said, we've recently just joined Wheatley Community Church, which is such a joy. But actually, when it was first mentioned, I was devastated, because we've been at OCC for the church we're part of. Al was there for 18 years, and I was there for 15 years, and that was family. And it just felt so painful, the idea of uprooting ourselves from family. And as far as I was concerned, I was there forever. Just happy to be there. And actually, I cried for about 2 weeks. I just cried and cried about it. And then it just felt like God gently going, do you know what? This is an opportunity for you to bring me a costly sacrifice. And actually that started to kind of burn and give me excitement in my heart, because I thought, do you know what? How amazing. With the walk with Florence, I believe we did it well, but I never chose it. And I wouldn't. Who'd choose that as a parent? And actually here I was like, we've got an opportunity to choose something which is not what we'd instantly want to do, and choose it and actually use it as offer it to God as something costly. And actually, sort of the irony in it is that once we chose to embrace it, the joy just came. And I was like, oh, Lord, this doesn't feel costly anymore. That's frustrating, because you kind of almost want to feel like, oh, this is it. But actually, then now we're just so happy. It's such a great thing. But actually, it was such a joy to be able to choose something that cost something. I guess this is probably a slightly stranger one to process if you wouldn't call yourself a Christian, because actually offering something costly to God is probably not at the top of your agenda. But there's a wonderful story that was written in the earliest 20th century, and there's a young couple who have very little money, and they both want to give each other a meaningful Christmas present. And so he sells his prize watch to buy some beautiful combs for her long hair, and she sells her beautiful long hair to buy a chain for his watch. And it's one of those sort of ironic kind of stories, but actually they both end up giving each other presents that are essentially useless, but in it they both show each other just how costly the sacrifice they wanted to give to show how much they love the other. And there's something very beautiful in it as well. And I think that can be like us with God. We want to show how much he means to us, and we can give as extravagantly as we can, knowing that he's already given more than we can ever repay anyway. And the last reason I wanted to offer for why be grateful was because it builds relationship. I'm thinking both of how it builds our relationship with God, but also how it builds our relationship with other people. And I don't know about other people here, but I know that when something goes wrong, so often I'm like, oh, whose fault is that? I rarely go, oh, you Wally, it was your fault. I'm just so quick to jump to it. My grandmother used to be really famous for attributing every single physical ailment she had to somebody. That person I sat next to, that lunch there, she gave me her cough. But actually, I think this is probably a widespread thing. And actually, over my years of knowing God, I felt like he keeps prodding me on that one. You can be so quick to want to blame people, but actually, he is so quick to show us grace. And I think this probably fits with today's culture, which is very much about me and my rights and entitlement. And And there is a sense of entitlement comes when we feel like we're owed certain things, which means that we can end up feeling quite resentful when we don't get those things that are our, or are owed to us. And I think it can be really countercultural to purposefully adopt a different attitude to this, rather than feeling like we're constantly owed things. Actually switching and kind of viewing things that we have as a gift, because then actually if you're viewing things as a gift, then actually when you get more, you're grateful, and actually when you don't get it, it's not, well, I should have had that. And actually that's something that can really positively affect our relationship with other people and with God. And it removes the sense of sort of resentment and blame, and can and it also removes the sort of an us and them mindset of like, I was expecting this and that person didn't deliver. But actually it becomes a lot more it levels the playing field, I think, sometimes, and it can end up with you being on the same team as people and sort of trying to solve what's going on together. I think whether or not you identify as a Christian, choosing to be grateful can really, really kind of change our relationships with other people, and it can change our marriages and our friendships and our relationships with our children. What I'm not saying is let's be unrealistic about things and kind of put a rose-tinted glaze on it. But I think sometimes if we choose to view things differently, it can actually end up changing us. And actually sometimes in changing us, it then changes the circumstances anyway. I'm really wary of mentioning Florence again, because I think it actually presents a really skewed view of our family. She is one fabulous part of our family, but she's only one part of it. But actually, I think because of the extra challenges that we have had with her, there are just more things that come to mind easily. But I think when you end up having a child with such profound extra needs, it can bring pity forth in people, but it can also sometimes just mean that you end up saying, well, why me? Why did this happen to me? Why our family? And actually, without wanting to paint an unrealistically perfect picture of myself, that's somewhere I didn't go, because actually I was very much aware that these things happen and they're around anyway, so why not us? Like, why not any, so that was not something I battled with. But the journey that's followed has had seasons and days and like a real challenge. Like, I'm not going to be silly and be like, it was just the diagnostic process that was hard and everything's easy. Like, it's really tough, actually, having a child with her needs. But I have had to guard my heart really carefully against the kind of starting on the road of like, this is unfair, I wish it was different. And actually, do you know what? This week has provided challenges for that. Isn't it always the way when you're going to talk about something and there are fresh examples in that week? But, even this week, Florence has started to become really aware of the fact that she's different. And that sort of breaks my heart a little bit, that she's having to process that for herself. But she's started to become quite aware of if people are singling her out in a good way at school to try and make things more accessible for her, she's actually started to get quite upset. And actually that's a new challenge with that. But actually I can't start down the road of I wish it were different and like, why us? Because actually there's a slippery slope and I don't know where that's going to end us. But actually what we can do is celebrate all the small victories along the way, and to choose to be thankful, because actually I don't think it's going to take me anywhere moaning about it, and not moaning, but it's not going to take me anywhere if I start down the line of I wish things were different, whereas actually it will take us choosing to celebrate what we have. And actually it changes my ability to cope with what we have as well. I do want to have a quick disclaimer though at this point, that what I'm not choosing is to stuff feelings down and just be like, I'm grateful, it's fine, and actually not process things, because that's not healthy, and also not it's not a good thing to do. And I want to be real to say that actually there have been times over the last years where I've needed real help processing it, and a few years ago I went and saw a psychologist review sessions that you could access through the fact that I have a child at the in paediatric outpatients, and I went and spent some sessions with her kind of working through the guilt that can come with parenting a child. Well, the guilt that comes through parenting anyway, let's be honest. I think it is probably a universal thing, but also the guilt that comes sometimes through parenting a child with extra needs, but also the kind of all the other things that came with that. And actually I want to kind of say, please, if you're struggling, don't just kind of okay, well, it's all right, I'm just going to choose things to be grateful for. That's good and valid, but actually it's also really important that we acknowledge where we are and walk with people through that. But I want to draw to a close here. So I think I've mentioned a few reasons that choosing gratitude is good, and the reasons were that God is always good and he always cares for us, because it can help mature us. Actually, it's a choice that we can make and that can grow us, because it's a costly offering that we can bring to God, and because it builds relationships both with God and others. And I guess I just wanted to end on a challenge really, which was, how do we see our lives? Do we see them as something that have just happened, that we've kind of ended up with, over which we have little control, or do we view it as a gift? And as a Christian, I believe all that I have is a gift, and it's and such everything is unearned. And actually viewing life through that lens prompts me to be grateful to God for it, and to see his fingerprints of goodness over it. So I guess I want to just leave you with that question. How do you see your life?